Today we are joined by the Honorable Carolyn Bennett, and it is such a pleasure to chat with you today. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'd love to know how you're spending this time, isolating and social distancing. What has that been like for you?
Well, it's very different in that, as you know, my job usually has me coast to coast to coast and airports and all over the place. So I'm doing this long days, but because, of course, talking to people coast to coast means that we are always, I think the last call last night was with Indigenous physicians across the country. That started at 8:30 at night, and went as long as it went. So it's different, but it's still contact. I think this is what we're learning, isn't it? We're learning we can do our jobs differently.
Absolutely. It's definitely within a crisis, you're getting an opportunity to do things a little differently. And I think it was such a shock for so many people. But as a doctor yourself, when you first started hearing about the virus, did you think it could affect us at such a global scale?
I think that I had been the Minister of Public Health after SARS, and so I made that as the comparison, and I think it was worrying because with SARS, we didn't know how it was transmitted, we didn't know the incubation, we didn't have a drug, we didn't have a vaccine, and so I think we knew that what had started in China could actually go broadly quickly. Our first instinct was to see if we could help confine it there, and then by the time Parliament resumed the end of January, we were already as a government with the Incident Response Committee, and knowing that we were going to have to get going. I think that in SARS, where there was no Chief Public Health Officer for Canada, there was no Public Health Agency of Canada, there was no network where the medical officers of health, those amazing people we see every afternoon on our TV screens, there was no real way they talked together with the federal government. And so we're in a better position now because of those lessons learned from SARS, but we still have huge challenges, and I think the long-term care facilities is obviously just a tragedy, and one of the things that we've been just got off a call about was the domestic violence going up 30%, alcohol going up 40%. That we need to make sure that everybody's safe and has real choices in terms of staying safe.
Now, talking about domestic violence, that's been such a huge concern because Canadians are being told to stay home, but sometimes their homes aren't a safe place for them. So are there more alternatives being offered to them than perhaps even women's shelters that could become overcrowded at this time?
Well, I think that this has always been the case, and the Prime Minister, I think, was pretty clear that that you don't have to stay home if it's not safe, and that we need to find ways of getting people where they need to be. And there was extra funds given to the women's shelters, but sometimes in very rural and remote communities that everybody knows where that is, and that is, we need safe houses, perhaps different approaches that are used maybe in some of the Latin American countries. There's things that we can always learn from other jurisdictions as to how women and their families need to have choices, and even in terms of the safe kids, having kids be in an environment where there is violence, and knowing that violence can be verbal abuse. It's not always physical violence, but it is not a safe space for children to have to exist in that environment.
So what options would they have as of today, especially during this pandemic, if someone is at home and finds themselves in a situation where maybe they're financially dependent on the person that is also, unfortunately, their abuser?
Well, I think that, again, that it's a matter of being able to get to those helplines and to be able to find very, usually local solutions. But you know, often people feel more comfortable if there's an opportunity to go to family and friends. But again, with COVID-19, that people have been asked to stay in their bubble. We did, again, the investments that have been made into the shelter system are about keeping those places safe and clean, and physically distancing if they can. But I think that women need to know that they're not alone, and that they are they need to reach out, and there are lots of people there who want to help.
And I think another concern for Canadians and another vulnerable population, of course, is the Indigenous communities. They can face overcrowding, poverty, food and water insecurity in some cases. So what is being done to ensure that those communities are fully equipped to take on a potential outbreak of COVID-19?
Well, I've been very impressed with the work that Indigenous communities have done on having a pandemic plan and then sticking to it, and the fact that they that the First Nations Health Managers Association doing such a spectacular job with their tele-town halls and everybody knowing, and that the areas where there's been a positive test, being able to confine it and make sure it doesn't go further into their communities. As you know, some of the communities have you know, blocked themselves off, and in Nunavut we don't have one case yet, because they've taken such rigid precautions.
And if there is a potential outbreak, I mean, obviously the hospitals there might not be as fully prepared as a downtown Toronto hospital, for example. So are they being given ventilators or temporary housing or any kind of additional resources to make sure that if thousands of cases come in, they can handle it?
So that's a very interesting point. Obviously, you can't have a ventilator unless you have somebody who knows how to run it, and so it's about the health personnel. So in the smaller nursing centers, those kinds of things, it's a matter of them deciding if the daycare is not being used, if there's other recreational space not being used, that could be space that would then be designated for isolation for those that needed to. And that anybody who is sick would have to come out. In the fly-in communities, that means Medivac. In some of the other communities, it will be, you know, safe transportation.
And then when it comes just to the regular healthcare system in Canada, I saw some news that ER doctors were being instructed to maybe take it a little slow on the painkillers. We might run into a drug shortage eventually if the pandemic does spread further. So is Canada actually prepared for a surge in the next coming weeks?
I think that people have understood that the being prepared for that surge is hugely important, as we've been trying to procure enough ventilators in those secondary and tertiary hospitals to be able to monitor the drugs. But it's been amazing. Anita Anand, the minister in charge of procurement, I mean, being able to source these things all over the world, but also Minister Baines on getting manufacturers to retool to make some of the things that we need. But on the drug shortages, I think we've got a very strict shopping list now, and that we're going to procure what we need. But a lot of people are thinking this may be the beginning of pharmacare. This is the way that people had hoped for, that there would be a way of making sure that those essential medicines are able to be accessible coast to coast to coast.
And on a lighter note, I did see online that you were doing this, a Zoom call, eating takeout with Minister Marco Mendicino and Rob Oliphant. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, well, throughout the election, we went for coffee once a week, and so this seemed right. And there was Takeout Wednesday or Takeout Canada, and so every Wednesday, people are supposed to take out and support their local restaurants. I think on TLN, you would be happy that both Marco and Rob chose Tutto Pronto and Viva Napoli were the ones chosen. I went to Albert's Jamaican food to pick up mine, and then we ate in front of our computers and had a a good conversation about the challenges, but also being able to enjoy one another's company.
And I think that's such an amazing message because we can still stay connected to our friends and we still have to support local businesses because they're the ones that are struggling the most right now.
They sure are, and I think that and they've done such an amazing job changing to curbside takeout, and so many of the places. Ferraro across the street here is always our local, and they had a lineup last night of 7 or 8 people, hockey stick apart, and so I think everybody's having to adjust.
Absolutely. It's a new normal for all of us, but I think we just have to stay hopeful. Before we let you go, is there a final message or something that you would like to share with our viewers back home?
Well, I think that I think my son put it pretty well in terms of stay calm and hibernate. I think that his feeling was that as Canadians that we're used to blizzards, we're used to having to stay inside sometimes, never for as long as this, but that after the winter comes the spring, and we hope that that the spring may be a little extended into summer even this time, but that we can do this, and that I think, as you've just pointed out, that no one's alone, and that we just need to pick up the phone, and particularly for those that have maybe been struggling before, for us to reach out to those people that we think might be having additional struggles now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us and for these incredible words for all our viewers back home.
Thank you. Okay. Keep up the great work.